Happy Saturday. This is our May Spine of the Month book chat with Eve Chung, and we're talking about The Young Will Remember. Such a fabulous book, and this is going to be a great discussion with Eve. We're welcoming her back. She was a Spine of the Month a couple years ago with Daughters of Shandong. So yes, we are ready to get started for our May Spine of the Month book chat. Can't believe it's May. Oh, but we're at the end of May. I can't believe that. And we're starting our summer reads. So before Eve jumps on, just letting you know that I've posted the link on the list for our summer reads that are coming up. So looking forward to that. Eve is here. And we'll get started. Let me turn off my music. Hey, Eve. Let me see. You'll have to request to join, or maybe I can put you in here. Hold on a second.
Oh, there we go. I think it's
There we
working now.
go.
Okay, sorry, I am
Hey,
the least tech savvy person, so I was
no worries, no worries.
muddling through it. I was like, I can't remember how I did this last time, but anyway, I'm glad I'm on. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us again. Another fabulous book.
Thank you. Thank
Oh my
you.
gosh, it's so good. My hard copy's there. Um, I mean, my goodness, like your historical fiction writing is top tier. I'm so
Thank you.
excited.
Thank you so much. And it's an
It's
honor to be here again because, I am really grateful for your support for my debut too. So I'm really happy that you enjoyed this
Right.
book
So,
as well.
welcome back, of course. I mean, welcome back. I'm going to do a quick introduction, and I'm going to let you, for people that don't know about you, I'm going to let you do a little quick intro about yourself and then give a little highlight of the book, and then we'll just dive right in. No spoilers, because we
Okay.
want people to purchase the book. That is the goal. And I thought I pasted the link for people to get the book, but hopefully it's on there. But hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Jamise. I am the founder of Diverse Spines. You can also find me over on Spines and Vines. And this is our monthly book of the month or spine of the month conversation with our featured author. This month, our book was The Young Will Remember by Eve Chung. Fabulous book. If you don't have it, if you haven't read it, listen to the audiobook, all the things. It is really worth your time. And we're so happy to have you back, Eve. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. So, hi, everybody. I am Eve J. Chung. I write historical fiction, and The Young Will Remember is my second book, and it's about a Chinese American correspondent who gets stranded in North Korea during a pivotal battle in the Korean War. And she has to find her way home with help from two North Korean women. And this is, again, at a point where the Korean peninsula is under heavy bombardment and their futures are all very uncertain.
So that's the perfect segue to what my first question. So your
Mhm.
debut, Daughters of Shandong, it was the Chinese Civil War that you kind of centered the story around. And
Yes,
in this book,
yes.
you're exploring the Korean War and these historical conflicts. So can you talk about the where the thematic connections were between the two books and what led you down this path?
So I chose to write about the Korean War because my husband is half Korean, and this is a war that's pretty pivotal to current geopolitics, and it's an intersection between Chinese, Korean, and American history. So the Korean Civil War, I guess the similarities in terms of the Chinese Civil War is there is that, I mean, there's one side that is communist or is the communist and the Chinese Communist Party, after winning the mainland of China, actually intervenes in the Korean War as well. And there is a bit of a tie in my first book because there is that moment where Mao, who, for those who don't know, is the head of the Chinese Communist Party, was prepared to invade Taiwan. And
Hmm.
when the Korean War broke out, he actually moved all of the troops that were ready to launch an amphibious assault on Taiwan up to the north to fight in North Korea, which is a totally different environment. That was a blizzard. It was the coldest winter, I think, in 40 years. So the casualty rate was really, really high.
Yeah, I noticed. I just wonder, like, the research that goes into writing this type of historical fiction novel. And the one thing I can say, like, I, it's so good. It's so much history, but it's not boring. Like, you're giving us information that most people probably didn't know or didn't realize that actually happened. So, talk a little bit about the research that you had to do to write the book.
So there was a ton of research, in part because we don't learn this in school, at least in the U.S. Like,
No.
I mean, I never learned any of it in school, and even as someone who did study a lot of 20th century history, I was constantly surprised by what I found. So I had to research the trajectory of the Korean War, but a lot of at least when you look at civilians and how they are impacted by it, you have to understand the connection to World War II, which
Hmm.
is, the aftermath of World War II is when the Korea Peninsula was partitioned. And then you have to go back to the Japanese occupation of Korea. So it felt like one door led to another. So there were so many things that I had to learn in order to sort of have the background to write this story.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the main character because I mean, I know like in your author's note, you talk about this, it's inspired by real life character. It's fiction, but it's inspired by real life characters. So let's talk about Ellie Chang because she is a very ambitious character, right?
Mhm.
And so let's talk about her and what drew you to telling the lens through a correspondent, a Chinese American correspondent.
So when I was planning the story, I knew Ellie had to be stranded in North Korea. So I
Mhm.
originally wanted her to be a pilot. And I had this planned out that she was a WASP in World War II and was, now in a more ambitious role in Korea. But then I found out that the roles for women actually took a step back from World War II. So women were allowed to fly, and the women Air Force service pilots were technically civilians, so they never got benefits as veterans or at the end of the war, they actually had to buy their own tickets to go home.
Mhm.
But I found out the Korean War, women weren't allowed to fly at all into the Korean Peninsula. And so, even though women were finally allowed to join the Air Force, they were stuck monitoring the weather in Tokyo. So,
Yeah.
um, I had to think of what else Ellie could be. And I briefly made her a flight nurse. But then I came across Maggie Higgins, who was a correspondent. And this is again where I think there's so many narratives that say there were no women on the front lines, no women on the front
Oh
lines. But
yeah.
we know, yeah,
Yes.
right? Yeah, we know there are nurses. And then,
Yes.
you know, but then on top of that, there was this correspondent who was there for the
Hmm.
Battle of Chosin, which the book opens with. Maggie Higgins was there to watch the Marines march back to that base. So that's where I took Ellie's inspiration from, but also Hazel Ying Lee, because
Yes.
Ellie, being a Chinese American, will face two types of discrimination in that environment. So even reading Hazel Ying Lee's biography, I had been surprised, even though I shouldn't be. Like I was aware that segregation was going on, but it was something that I did not think about until I was reading Hazel Ying's novel, where she talks about growing up, there were stores that had clear signs, no Orientals allowed.
Hmm.
And so that, I think I do refer to that in my book, but
Yeah.
to build Ellie, it's considering that time period and what she probably faces on a daily basis as a woman in covering military activity who also looks like the enemy.
Yeah, so she's on this plane. She's catching a ride, right, on the plane,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the plane is shot down.
Yes,
And
yes.
so talk about, I don't think it's giving anything away, but just talk a bit about the dynamics. She's discovered, she's recovered, and who is the woman that discovers her?
Yes. So her plane is shot down, and she essentially is surrounded by a mix of Chinese and North Korean soldiers. And
Hmm.
there's a point where she is worried for herself. She doesn't speak any Korean. So that is a thing. That is a big problem for her
Yeah.
being stranded in North Korea. But then a woman who she doesn't know comes forward and tells a lie. And Ellie at the time doesn't really know what's going on, but essentially this woman claims that Ellie is her daughter just to save her from the soldiers. And that was the heart of the story. When I set out to write it, I wanted to write about two women who are on the opposite sides of a war
Yes.
and sort of adopting a mother-daughter relationship, like almost a stand-in. So when I first came up with the story, the title was going to be The Changeling, as in like Ellie becomes a stand-in for her daughter, even though obviously
Hmm.
she's not. So and it's about the universality of motherhood and those bonds that we have.
Yeah, I think that's the, the tie that I see, or the thread that I see through, both your novels. You're talking about motherhood, you're talking about women,
Mhm.
the unseen women, and then the connection, across lines. Because here we have two women, they are on opposite sides of the war, right? But they're coming together. Um, can you talk a little about like the collateral damage, like in history books, because women are forgotten so often
Mhm.
in the stories, and they're kind of
Yes.
behind the scenes or left out, and just talk a little about that and why your focus really is to bring them to the forefront.
Yes. So I think women are forgotten in so many ways. The impact of war on women, because they face unique harms. There's a lot of when you have any military activity, how it affects women, how it affects men is different. I know my first book, um, I did intentionally call attention to menstruation, for example, because I don't think that's often talked about, like what you do when you are a refugee and you have no hygiene products for hygiene.
Hmm.
In this one, it's the damage of war on women, but also women's contributions during war.
Yeah.
So I wanted to emphasize too that it isn't just that women are victims of war, but women are activists. They are correspondents, they're journalists, they are
Hmm.
doctors, and also in this one in particular, they fight too. Women
Yes.
are soldiers. So um, just even like I said, when researching, I kept hearing there's no women on the front lines, but we have our American women, but you have Chinese pilots, you have Chinese women who are pilots, snipers, infantry, and also Korean women taking those roles, and of course the civilians who are on the front lines. Those are
Hmm.
all women that are kind of forgotten from that narrative. So in this, I did want to humanize these battles, because I think when we look at battles, we think like tonnage of bombs dropped, we think number of soldier deaths, and
Hmm.
how the front line moves, territory that's captured, but in that there are human lives caught up in this.
Yeah, I listened to your NPR interview, and I was really struck by the us versus them during wartime,
Mhm.
right?
Yes,
and
yes.
and and the way you talk about how us versus them, but then
Mhm.
it's still, human life, we're still the same, right? So can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, in another event that I did, someone actually asked me this question, and I wasn't able to answer it in the moment, not this specific question, but they asked about
Hmm.
a scene where Ellie, I hope this is kind of a small spoiler, but she gives
That's okay.
essentially
They should
what
have.
is,
That's okay.
okay.
It's fine. It's book
Um,
club.
she gives a safe conduct pass to a Chinese soldier. And someone
Hmm.
asked me, like, why would she give it to him? And I think maybe that person didn't quite understand what her relationship with that soldier meant. So there's a point in the book where this soldier has the opportunity to blow Ellie's cover. And he tells her, I know you're lying. But
Hmm.
then he makes a comment. He says, well, you're one of us. And if we don't help each other here or something, we have to help each other, keeping in mind she's not actually one of them.
Them,
She's married.
right?
He's
Yeah.
Chinese. Later, the point of these safe conduct passes is it's in theory, a guarantee of good treatment as a prisoner of war. So she meets this Chinese soldier again, and she's been sort of holding on to this pass in case she has to use it, because she also doesn't know how American troops will react to her when she gets back to their
Hmm.
side. And she gives that to him, and she also says, you're one of us, and we have to look out for each other. But again, she's American.
Right.
And that connection between them was meant to show how blurry that line of us, one of us. What
Mm-hmm.
does that mean? Like overall, it changes so much. I mean, depending on where we are born, and a lot of it is
Yeah.
arbitrary. So in war, I think we as in humankind try to make this very bold line between us and them, when really it is porous, and I hope
Mm-hmm.
we hold on to that.
Yeah. Um, Another part of it is, the framing when we talk about it, like in the media and history books and things like that, we say, how do we, how we talk about war versus genocide, like the words and the
Mhm.
framing matter.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
It is very important. And I think in the Korean War, you see that this is a war where both sides, North and South Korea, have heavy support from
Hmm.
Russia or the Soviet Union back then and the US. There are warplanes, you know, the top level warplanes. The Soviets had the MiG 15, the US had the F 86. There's tanks, they are fighting each other. And I think in distinguishing a war and a genocide, I forget which scholar said this, but they were saying look at the child death toll. In
Hmm.
armed conflict, the percentage of child deaths, in a war, the percentage of child deaths is quite low relative to, say, soldiers.
Hmm.
But in a genocide, it is very high because
Correct.
there
Yeah.
is that is a very important distinction. And I do think that there's a lot of perhaps intentional misunderstanding about the definition of a genocide.
Hmm.
For my background, I have a master's in international criminal law and I study genocide. And genocide it has a two-prong requirement. One is the act of killing groups of people. You don't have to kill an entire group. It's in whole or in part. You don't have to kill everybody. Um, I think that's important to remember. And then it's the intent. There's the intent to destroy a people. And I think that is one that is that's what's in the Rome Statute. And it is important to distinguish between war and genocide. Um, and yeah, and this one, I mean, there are scholars who argue that there was a genocide in North Korea too. And that, I think there is debate back and forth in part of that intent. But
Hmm.
in a lot of genocides, it's very clear because of what leaders say, where leaders
Right.
are literally saying, like, we want to eliminate this group of people. And um, that intent can also be inferred by actions deliberately carried out to prevent survival, whether it's destroying all of health facilities or creating situations where civilians cannot get food.
Right. So you said this earlier, and I was going to ask you this. The title really, I was really struck by the young will remember. And so, what is it's like a theme? Like, what do you want people to remember? It seems like you want like younger generations to remember, or what do you want people to remember about this book? Because I love the title.
Thank you. So the title came from the attempts at many governments to cover up their human rights abuses. And when it comes to military sexual slavery, I think there is a fear that the women who survived are dying out. There are very few of them left.
Hmm.
And this title came to me because, again, my original title changed a lot. I was going to call it The Changeling, which I guess was too sci-fi. And then I thought about calling it Yalu River, but it hit me when I was looking at a protest for accountability for survivors of military sexual slavery. And there was a young woman holding up a sign that said, like, don't be sad, Granny, we will remember. And
Mm.
it's a promise to these women who are scared that when they die, it'll be easier for governments to say, like, they were volunteers, that they
Yeah.
consented. And it's a promise, like, no, we remember what happened to you. And that, I think, is one of the few forms of justice that they can have.
Yeah, because you talked about comfort women in your debut, and then talk about it here in this book. But I think Emma refuses to call them that. She calls them slaves, right?
Yes.
Yes, she calls
Yes.
them exactly what they are.
Mhm.
And so, can you talk a little about that and the nuance there with, she's looking for her daughter. She thinks she's either dead or she's also become, a sex slave as well.
Hmm. Yes. Um, that was important to me. And I know, again, this is a work of fiction. And I did think about back in that time, I don't know if a character like Emma would have used the word slave.
Hmm.
I did go back and forth on that, but it was a decision I made because that vocabulary is important. And I do think part of control of media, and for women, women often don't have control of the narrative. It is often men who are controlling the narrative. Um, the labels we put on people matter. It affects how many people pay attention to their stories and also what people take from them. So the word comfort women, I mean, it is very soft. It is very
Very.
soft considering how young these women were, what they went through. I do encourage people to read the testimony from these women where they talk about the brutality they went through. They were trafficked, they were slaves, they were killed for having STDs. So that word, I think, really minimizes the harm. And
Yeah.
I find that common for violations that affect women across the world, where it's just sort of like even the term, what was it? For girls who are raped, they call them underage women.
Yeah.
But no, they're children.
They're children. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
They're children. Yes,
Hmm.
exactly.
Hmm.
Um, Talk about the relationship and the character development, the arc of the relationship between Ellie and Emma as the time goes on, and how their relationship developed.
So that is the core of the book. And I think
Hmm.
initially, Emma, she even says herself that she needs to believe. And Ellie being there, I think, helps her hold on to the hope that somewhere her daughter is being taken care of and her daughter is safe. So, and Ellie also needs Emma too. She's far from home, she's scared. Um, and she's not sure if she'll ever see her own mom again. So
Hmm.
that relationship, a lot of it is, and it goes to the us versus them idea, that us versus them is porous, like it's blurry. It's you can be a person and see another child and see your own child in them. Obviously not every
Yeah.
person can do this, but I do think the world would be a better place if we could.
Talk about some of the, I know you talked early on about some of the women, but talk about some of the real life historical fiction figures that are, weaved throughout the story, and if there's any personal family history, that you use to ground the story. 'Cause I know we have a pastor and emo.
Yes. So my husband's grandfather was a pastor from North Korea. So that was why I chose to make one of the characters a pastor.
Hmm.
And in part also because of North Korea's very Christian history. So which is like, again, something I didn't really know before studying this more, that Kim Il Sung, the first leader of North Korea, came from a very religious family. His father was a teacher at a Christian missionary school, and on his mom's side, apparently everyone was very religious. So, what was interesting is when that government first kind of came about, there were a lot of religious leaders in it, and a lot of those were people who were challengers to Kim. So that's also why, I have a pastor as a character. But there is also a thread between, at least for an American audience, this idea where we, in that war, see North Koreans as sort of a them, when our enemies are often more similar to us than we think.
Hmm.
So that was also to show that if you take time and listen to a person's story, you likely will find more similarities to yourself. And
Yeah.
I think, that's a very important thing to remember in the context of war.
I think it's an important thing to remember in the context of everything. It's so funny you
Yeah.
said that because that
Yeah.
is literally the reason why I started Diverse Spines. Like what
Oh,
you just said,
yeah.
like when you read and learn someone's story, you find out there's more similarities than differences. And that's
Mhm.
so funny that you said that. Um, Talk about like how, so here you've written two stories and you're talking about war and you're talking about like the effects that it has on women, the things that were done to women. Like what was challenging? Who was a challenging character to write? What was a hard scene? How do you get through writing two books back to back like this?
This one I think was harder than my
Hmm.
first book, in part because, well, just having to do more research, and having to really make up the story versus my first
Okay.
book, it's my grandmother's story. So I have a
Yes.
roadmap and I can say,
Yeah.
do I want to stick to that? Do I want to deviate? This one, I had to come up, with it myself. And it is a heavier book, in part because Ellie is on the front lines of
Hmm.
of the war, and she's seeing a lot of the graphic things that are happening to people. I think that it takes an emotional toll to write about war.
Yeah.
That is the most challenging thing in a book like this. That there were moments when I did feel like I cannot like stomach writing more about it. And then I
Mm.
would take a break and work on something more lighthearted, or I would do something else. But it was hard. There are a lot of scenes that I think are very difficult. I think one of the hardest was writing Emo, because she is kind of a character full of surprises.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, she's full
Yeah.
of various surprises. And I'm someone who actually doesn't really plan before I write.
Okay.
I start at the beginning, I write chronologically, and at each step, I think, where are we going now? And I have like the end in sight, but the middle. So I never even intended for Emo to be a major character, but
Oh,
she
okay.
just sort
That's
of took.
interesting.
I know. It was supposed to be Ellie and Emma, and then these people in the background, but somehow Emo just kind of sucked up more of my attention, and she grew to be this side
Yeah.
character. Um, but it's similar. Like Ellie initially um, really doesn't like her,
Hmm.
and that's sort of on a personal level of like people can be more similar to you than you think. Like
Yes.
if you give,
That's
if
probably
you,
the reason why you don't like.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You see
um,
some of the things you don't like about yourself showing up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and so I forgot you brought it back to my memory that right, your grandmother's story was the first book. And so what did you have to do differently as a writer? Because you said you had to make the story up and do you like you said you don't plan. So what did you have to do? Like what did you have to pull from yourself to write this story?
Um, I think I drew a lot on what is going on in the world today.
Yeah.
I think that the Korean War is in the US often called the Forgotten War.
Yes.
And I do think there is a pattern of the US, for whatever reason, getting involved in a war and thinking that it can be won by dropping an astronomical amount of bombs on people.
Yeah.
And that has not proved effective. And on top of not being effective, the human toll is horrific.
Yeah.
And this, I think, pattern of forgetting and then repeating these same mistakes
Hmm.
is harmful.
Yeah.
And yeah, and even when I remember when I was talking about this book and my research to friends, I think we portray North Korea, and North Korea has major human rights issues and major human
Hmm.
rights violations. But when we talk about their hatred for the US, I think there's kind of this narrative like they hate us because we're free. Um, and that's not correct. Like
Yeah.
they have legitimate reasons to be very upset at the US military. Um, and this carries forward. I think to have peace, you must reckon with the past. You have to
Yes.
reckon with actions, such as the decision to split the Korean Peninsula in two simply because the US and the Soviet Union couldn't agree on who would take the lead in the Japanese surrender. Something like that, which again, as we see today, a major geopolitical security issue in the region
Yeah.
is from that single decision. So I think there's a lot to learn. I think looking back at our past and doing things differently is what would make our world safer in the future.
I agree wholeheartedly. And
Mhm.
I think like when I received the arc of the book, right? And then realizing when it come out, there's no way that you would know that we would be at a war when this book comes out, right?
Yes.
And so it makes it
Yes.
even more like while you're reading it, and I was listening to the audiobook, and I'm just thinking like, wow,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
very and I didn't know a lot about the Korean War, Korean
Yeah.
Civil War. I didn't know a lot about it and the things that went on. And so it's just very eye opening. It really, really is eye opening. And it's just like, you know, you continue to explore memory, storytelling, and who gets remembered, right?
Yes.
In
Yes.
history. So go ahead, please expound.
Now, I was thinking in this war, the Korean War, there is a dehumanization of people that I think has become very common in war. Um, this is and I do think it's to justify the awful things that we do to people,
Hmm.
whether it's war crimes, I mean, crimes against humanity. The issue with mass bombing is it fails to distinguish between military and civilian targets. And you see, um, there is a point where General MacArthur decides that every single village is a military target,
Mm,
as we know, that's not true. And I mean, that's where you get that like question, it was there an intent to just kill everybody
right.
um in the region? And again, we need to hold on to that humanity. And I also am scared to see us losing it, not just in our
Hmm.
wars abroad, but how that echoes back home. This
Correct.
idea that
Yeah.
people that look a certain way, it doesn't matter
Yes.
if their lives don't matter, their lives don't really count. That carries that echoes beyond the war zone. And
Yeah.
so I to write this book, I do think there is a lot of grief going into that, into
Hmm.
what is happening in communities here, this resurgence of this us versus them type of
Yes.
narrative along whatever religious, ethnic, or racial lines. So I I think I tell people that I write often because of staying sane in some
Mm.
ways. Like it's an
And I
outlet.
saw that when you said that, I was like, okay, yeah,
Yeah, like it's an outlet because um, there's so much harm, but I also think there's a lot of good too.
yeah.
Even now, there are the people who are crossing whatever boundaries that other people are painting, crossing those boundaries, standing up for people who don't look like them, who aren't
Hmm.
their religion. And we need to keep doing that. I think
Yeah.
we need to keep pushing back. I mean, I live in New York, which is a very diverse city. I think it's easy here to see the humanity of people
Yeah.
who, other types of people. Um, and I think we have to amplify that type of story. And so I do hope in writing this type of story that people will read it and have that sense that many of the divisions forced on us are artificial.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. It's artificial. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, the book is incredible. Like your debut was incredible. It's just like, my goodness. And you talk a lot about humanity. And so Ellie's understanding of humanity evolves throughout this whole journey, right? What
Mhm.
did you want readers to wrestle with emotionally through her journey? Like, what did you want people to see?
I think I want them to sit with Ellie's discomfort. So, I
Mm,
mean, Ellie, and again, she is a person between worlds. And I think a lot of people who, whether they're diaspora in this country or even have lived abroad in another country, once you have that tie, I think you are more immune to whatever war propaganda there is that wants to convince you that the enemy, that there's no innocent person in
yeah.
wherever place you're fighting. Like, that's not true. Um, so I think there is that chapter where Ellie really emphasizes that so much of peace depends on us, on ordinary people who have formed those bonds. I think reading books help us form those bonds because
Yes.
when you read, you see the world through the eyes of another person. And I think that also reduces the ability for whoever is in power to tell us like this is us, this is them, and for us to be safe, they have to go.
Yeah. I that's such a strong point, and it's so true, and it's the reason why there's so many book bans going on. People read,
Yeah.
and I'm truly grateful for writers like you that shed the light on these stories, and then forces conversation. This book is definitely going to spark conversations among readers. It's great for book clubs. I mean, I've been recommending it to so many people, um, especially in this time and in this moment, right? And so I want to know, like, what do you want readers to take away from the story?
Um,
And you kind of touched on it early on, but I'm sure there's other things that you want people to take away from the story.
I think one, the need for accountability for
Mm,
crimes that affect women. I think we're too often told that, um, I mean, I hear this line like all politicians do bad things. Like that's not true.
yeah.
And like we can pick better
And
people.
that's not an
Yeah.
excuse.
And it's not an excuse. Exactly. Like more, with however many people we have in this world, like who we
Yeah.
select as our leaders matter, what we choose to overlook also matters. And this idea that I think harms against women and girls can be dismissed. I
Hmm.
think we have to stop that. Just what I touched on earlier in that like we need to reject the divisions that are used to justify harms against other humans. Um, and focusing on accountability. I think lack of accountability leads to a lot of these cycles, whether it's
Hmm.
accountability for leaders who push us to war for whatever reason. I mean, I think there are various leaders who are going to war to protect their own power because they're afraid of going to
Yes.
jail or whatever. They're afraid of losing
Hmm.
power. Like that is unacceptable because every leader that's allowed to do that means subsequent leaders see that as a tactic they can use.
Yeah.
So accountability is important, and I do think that we as people can push for it. And I think this is the time where if we don't want to be caught in these endless cycles of war, accountability really matters.
What, if you can share, are you working on? What's next for you? I mean, more historical fiction. I mean, this is a lane for you. A very, very good lane. And I love that you're focusing on, you know, stories about women,
Mhm.
So what's next?
So I do have two projects. I do have a historical fiction in the works that's too early for me to talk about, but I think
Okay.
one book that so when I was talking about this book and how heavy it was, I turned to sort of a more lighthearted project, and it is actually a vampire book.
Oh
And
my goodness.
yeah, I know.
What that's a switch.
It's a big switch, but it also is very political. My
Okay.
vampires are all older women, essentially older aunties who are immigrants. And
Okay.
it's about their fight against injustice and
Okay.
also about a lot of misunderstanding. I mean, there's a lot of themes that I touched upon here that are also there, like who we label as monsters, like what
Okay.
you know, I have a friend, and it's funny because I actually don't like vampires, just generally because I don't like the gore. And I had a friend who was saying a vampire is always a stand-in for something that is taboo in
Mm,
society. And in my book, the taboo is being foreign. Like there's something about, but it's a comedy. Like, well, it's a dark comedy. There are very dark themes in it
hmm.
about, you know, I mean, I think about xenophobia. I mean, indirectly, but long story short, it is about this 80-year-old woman who was turned into a vampire, and she lives with her, she's passed down from generation to generation. So there is sort of this allusion to generational trauma. Um, and her relationship with her like latest descendant who has to essentially take care of her and kind of hide her. But
Okay.
I hope I'm doing it justice. I feel like every time I describe this book, I don't really do a good job. But
I mean, I can
the
hear all the themes. I mean, I can see everything being weaved in from previous stories. It's just a different avenue.
It's a different yeah, it's a very different avenue. It's not historical fiction, but it does again touch on like this woman just wants to be left alone, but then when her community sort of starts to crumble around her, she finds herself in a position where she has to get involved. And um Yeah, it was something that was lighthearted to sort of let me like relax a bit when I was working on The Young Will Remember, although, you
Hmm.
know, there are dark parts of it too. So that's the one that I think I'm farthest along just because I've had
On.
more time with it.
I think I asked you this, but like I know when we talked about Daughters of Shannon being your grandmother's story, but was there something that happened that made you want to write this story, or or you discovered a character that you wanted to talk about the young girl? Remember, like what was what started you down that path?
I mean, I often tell people that the story is my story. You know, I work in the human rights field. I have friends in conflict zones.
Hmm.
You know, when I first started working, I worked on the Rwanda. I mean, worked on as in like my first exposure to any type of work was for the criminal tribunal for Rwanda.
Oh
So,
wow.
you know, there's a lot of just, I think when I started, and this was in my 20s, I did have this genuine belief that things will get better. The
Mm,
world will be a better place. We have learned our lesson and we'll never let things like this happen again. But this is not true. And I did think about like, again, what we forget and what we must hold on to. And yeah, I mean, I think I was in a place that was pretty dark. Um, I do think writing gives me hope because even
hmm.
following these stories, I just think there's so many people out there fighting for good, whether it's fighting, I mean, Alec says that she fights with words. And I believe that. I believe that we can counter a lot of evil through words, through
Hmm.
connection, through just things like this, sharing stories with people. And I do, again, I feel like I joined the human rights field because I am an optimist and I believe that, you know, we can do it.
Yeah, I think, your background and everything, it clearly shows through. I didn't know about the Rwanda part, but I just think that it's kind of like a light bulb moment for me because everything kind of now I see it just it's much more vivid for me now in this
Yeah,
conversation. Yeah.
yeah. And to add as well, I do think a lot of the labels that we do use for a legal term, um, it doesn't make something less horrible for the people. I think if you've lost your
Mm,
children in a war, I don't think it matters to that mom whether it is a war or a genocide or like even just
yeah.
gang warfare, like the grief that you feel. And so I also find sometimes in the world, like there's an idea, oh, if it's not at this level, it's okay. It's not. Like it's still not
It's not,
okay. Like
it's
war
still
crimes are
not.
not okay. Mass bombing is not okay. Like just because like it's still, you know, evil that's being done to people who really just want to live. And one of the strongest, I love this point that was saying a lot of these like wars aren't between this group or that. It's a war between those who want peace and those who don't. And I do
Yes.
think that there is um, there's an author, Arundhati Roy. I'm
Yes.
butchering her name. I'm
Hmm.
sorry.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Hmm.
Yeah. And she said once we made weapons to fight wars, and now we fight wars to sell weapons. That's not the exact phrase, but her
Hmm.
idea is that there are people who are profiting immensely off of war.
A
And that
100%.
itself is a huge problem too.
Yeah.
And you know, and a lot of those same people are the ones who are controlling the stories that are getting told. And so, I mean, I think we need to separate the money from these narratives and look at journalists, reporters who are committed to, like Ellie. I mean, that's part of Ellie and Emma. They are telling the
They're
stories
telling a
from their
story.
heart and not
Yes.
trying to um, convince people of the need to hurt other people.
Yeah. And I'm not close on this, but it's just interesting when I have conversations with people, we're talking about books, especially ones when there's war. It's always, it amazes me that they always say that women weren't there
Yeah, yeah,
for whatever reason. Um, and then as more, discoveries happening and uh, people are realizing that women were there and that people would actually believe that women weren't there.
yeah. And I remember even seeing just again some of the narratives now in the military or there's I think a might have been a podcaster who made some remark like, women or ladies sit down if war is being discussed because you can't be drafted, which I do think there is this mentality like, oh, you can't be drafted, you can't be a soldier, so like you don't know. But again, like my response to that is every soldier was grown in a womb. Every
Yeah.
soldier is connected to a community. And again, women fight in wars. Women are engineers. Women are scientists. Women are in the infantry, in the Navy. And they take so many roles that are erased. But, or even just things like, the women who are making uniforms, making coats. Like, yeah, I think it's very easy for, again, those who control the narratives to erase voices that are different from their own. And that is
Hmm.
also why like women telling stories is really important, because I don't think if we push to tell or amplify these stories, like they won't make it through whatever the regular channels are.
Yeah. And as time goes on, it'll be forgotten. It would be
Hmm.
a totally different narrative than what actually happened.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it's always so great to talk to you. I mean, I learned so much reading your books, but then when we have our conversation, it's just always a really good, in-depth conversation. I can't thank you enough for
Thank you.
everything that you're doing. And you guys, it's The Young Will Remember, Eve J. Chung. Thank you so much, Eve. And can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you. And thank you so much. And have a good day.
You too. Bye bye. Thanks, you guys.
Bye.